The intellectual dark web is not your friend. Now, this may seem obvious to some, and to others, that this loose-knit collection of academics, writers, thinkers, and media figures who oppose what can be considered the rising and ongoing trend of woke social rules, regulations, norms, all that allegedly push for a more egalitarian society to be on our side as dissidents. After all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as the old saying goes. But last week, a bit of drama unfolded between members of the intellectual dark web, also known as the IDW, and the dissident/reactionary sphere that warrants our attention. I know what you might be thinking. E-drama happens all the time, especially on Twitter. Why should I care? Because what took place is a reaffirming lesson for dissidents not to trust more mainstream voices that claim to be the voice of reason, caution, and warning against the ongoing rise in political capture from progressivism. So with that being said, let's get started. The spat, which led to a rather impotent tantrum from the IDW, involved that of Mr. James Lindsay. Lindsay is a PhD mathematics professor turned anti-woke activist. He has a sizable following on Twitter and other platforms, and is the host of the New Discourses podcast. He is close with many on the mainstream right, whose threads and interactions with other anti-woke academics and quote classical liberals like Dave Rubin can be found all over the more non-progressive side of Twitter and other social media. He works closely at the moment with those pursuing to remove critical race theory from the school curricula of various states as well as higher education. You can see him with figures like Dr. Karlin Boroshenko, Christopher Rufo, and others. However, if you follow James for any length of time, if you haven't been blocked by him already, you'll notice that he's far more antagonistic on his account, trolling woke identity politics accounts before going on massive threads about how Hegel and Foucault are responsible for all of the world's woke problems. The important thing, though, that separates James from other anti-woke, anti-identity politics figures of the intellectual dark web is that James has been known to have an eerily similar number of takes, ideas, and threads based on the work of Curtis Yarvin, best known by many as Mencius Moldbug, whose works are considered vital canon to the neo-reactionary movement. Many of his tweets and threads appear to be right out of unqualified reservations, Moldbug's claim to fame now well over a decade old. But it isn't just Moldbug that Lindsay has perused through to make observations on how power is distributed and functions here in the United States. He has also discussed the concept of spiteful mutants and bio-Leninism without giving the necessary credit or title to Edward Dutton or Spandrel. Now you might be thinking, in the world of online politics, arguments and ideas get shared around and are used by all sorts of people without giving them credit. So what's the big deal? Besides, Prudentialist, if someone who is a little more mainstream is promoting dissident right and neo-reactionary talking points, isn't this good for the movement and ideology, overall to have a potential list of new converts from the disaffected liberal and the normie conservative crowd? Which brings us to the events that led to the creation of this video. Lindsay on March 26 responded to an observational quote tweet from Alex Kaschuta, a prominent post-liberal writer and social commentator and host of the Subversed Cast podcast. Her works are well known in dissident circles, and has interviewed many well-known writers and thinkers, including Curtis Yarvin himself. I'll leave a link in the description to Aaron McIntyre's video with her, so you can get a feel for her work as well. Alex had asked if James's recent remarks, shown here, had meant that he had crossed the proverbial line in the sand in terms of his ongoing support for political and the ideological framework of modern-day Enlightenment liberalism. To which James responded, claiming that the issues that we see are a natural consequence of liberalism in the same way that male feminists are a consequence of masculinity, articulating that there are external factors and not the framework itself that has gotten us to where we are. A debate certainly worth having, but more on that later. Alex responded in kind, arguing that the negotiation and renegotiation and the capitulation of boundaries are pretty much indistinguishable from that of contemporary liberalism. James, being James Lindsay, having to get the final say and snark before things got out of his comfort zone, simply went off, calling Alex a postmodern trad, and blocked her. The drama was on. Numerous accounts had called him out for blocking her, saying that they had shared a common enemy, and other political YouTubers who have his ear tried warning him about this, only for him to double down on his position. For transparency's sake, I too took part in this, and have called out my issues with James in the past. However, the blocking wasn't the end of it. James Lindsay proceeded to go on this little nugget of a rant. Quote, "Regarding the neo-reactionary idiots, they have a solution to the woke problem. Maybe-ish. But it's the solution literally everyone else wants to avoid for very good reasons. If more people don't step up, it's the bad solution we'll end up with. If nobody who is reasonable will stand up with strength, the people with scary bad solutions will be the only option, and people will defect to it as its desperation increases. Unless more reasonable people step up, we'll be forced to choose between a side between them and the woke. Yes, this is how we got Hitler, and the more extreme in the crowd actually support." End quote. I feel the need to break down the objections here, which will allow me to make the title of this video make a little more sense in just a few moments. James's contempt for the flack he's getting from dissidents, post-liberals, post-left, and neo-reactionaries is telling of the stated versus revealed preferences of his. Like the problems we see with social progressives, wherein the societal ills are pathologized but never cured in pursuit of power and control, James has shown his revealed preference for the woke. James, knowing he has to make a choice between the neo-reactionaries, whose ideas he loves to use as his own, and the woke, has chosen the woke. And why wouldn't he? He can make a sizable living off breaking down the postmodernist roots of critical race theory, have debates and podcast guests, and make a name for himself in the public eye. It is, as Nick Land described in The Dark Enlightenment, those looking over the edge, into the abyss, yelling "stop," caught in the perpetual exasperation and humiliation. What is worse is that James doesn't identify what the neo-reactionary solution to the woke problem actually is. Is it Yarvin's call for neo-cameralism, or some kind of Republican monarchism that he's advocated in recent essays on Grey Mirror? James, at this point, is purposefully obfuscating his opposition, a classic trait of homeopathic politics to poison the well of ideas. But certainly the worst part isn't the fear-mongering, but the invoking of Godwin's law that is the most frustrating, and indicative that James isn't willing to engage ideas from the right in good faith. Both Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land have very publicly rejected anti-Semitism and white nationalism, arguing in their own essays and writings as to why they're not white nationalists themselves. Conflating third-positionists and ethno-nationalists with NRX is done just deliberately to sway the Overton window. Which is exactly what the intellectual dark web is for. It is to maintain the current system that has brought Cthulhu into the North Atlantic Oscillation, speeding things up culturally and politically as entropy can be seen all around us. The IDW, much like the Republican Party, is the culture war's equivalent of driving the speed limit, drawing lines in the sand that they themselves will inevitably cross. See? Cancel culture is bad. They try to cancel me, but you should buy my books, watch these conversations with myself and other disaffected academics who didn't object until it came my way. The IDW longs for the days of true liberalism, where their positions of authority and power were deemed to be the most respectable and worthy. It is the nature of the IDW, with its members ranging from academics, professors, researchers, media figures, classical liberals, and remnants of the new atheist movement that are done as a faux countercultural movement to keep the Overton window swaying further and further to the left. After all, these people are not right-wing in any true sense of the term, but they are labeled right-wing nonetheless for their trivial opposition to the left and woke techno-capital. To reference the Dark Enlightenment once more, quote, "The right has no unity, actual or prospective, and thus no definition symmetrical to that to the left. It is for this reason that political dialectics, a tautology, ratchets only in one direction, predictably towards state expansion and an increasingly coercive substantial egalitarian ideal. The right moves to the center, and the center moves to the left." End quote. The intellectual dark web have no unity, other than a distinct opposition to the racial grievances in pursuit of equality of outcomes that go against their classically trained liberal opinions, despite the fact that they're defending the very system that gave rise to what they oppose in the first place. Which brings us, of course, to the title of this video, Modern-Day Girondists. The Girondists, or the Girondins, were a loosely knit political faction during the early days of the French Revolution. Artwork of them are quite prominent on this channel if you've been following me for any length of time. They were active during the days of the Legislative Assembly and National Convention. They were advocates for the abolition of the monarchy, but not any of the further, more radical notions of changes suggested by the Jacobins, led by the infamous Maximilien Robespierre. The Girondists were described as men of theory and not action, preferred petitions and legislative action in the assembly rather than on-the-ground action against their political opposition. Come the time of the Reign of Terror, the Jacobins would hold a trial of 22 prominent Girondists who had been declared supporters of federalism, traitors to the cause, and with a prominent loathing of the city of Paris and its influence of the revolution over that of the rest of the country. To or after the trial on October 31st, 1793, 22 were executed via beheading. The Girondists' opposition to the radicalism, while still supporting reform to the current system, and by extension still wishing to operate within that system for their own ends, is a fitting comparison for the IDW types we see today. From Sam Harris to Jordan Peterson to James Lindsay, all of these people have little in common. The title itself, the intellectual dark web, varies from person to person as a loosely knit faction of political and academic personalities. But they too are men of theory, and not so much as action. There is no major pushback other than words, videos, essays, and podcasts from these men. And much like their French counterparts, they too will eventually be beheaded, either literally or figuratively by their ravenous Jacobin counterparts that we now see as the woke left. The drama with James Lindsay and the dissident liberal skeptic crowd is indicative of a few lessons and observations worth noting. 1. The IDW types oppose the entropy to the left only nominally. They thrive in the current system, and will associate themselves with the right in name only as they offer a push to the center. See Dave Rubin's advocacy for big tent conservatism, comprising of everyone but actual right-wingers. 2. The IDW will not in good faith engage with ideas from the right, and only serve to keep the ratchet turning to the left. When they feel that their ideas or supremacy over the conversation is threatened, reductio ad Hitler will inevitably happen. 3. Dissidents, whether you're post-left, dissident right, neo-reactionary, or just have issues with the current system, must take the friend-enemy distinction more seriously, as those who may fight your enemies are not necessarily your allies. With that being said, it is important for us to not be just men of letters ourselves, but men of action as well. We must network and engage in ways that will allow our ideas and knowledge to survive the coming reign of terror of the 21st century. The IDW will eventually be consumed by their own petty infighting, or will at least come to terms that they are enablers of the very mob that will feast on their own destruction. Arrogance is never the way forward, as it is always pride before the fall, and we must be better than that. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this video. As always, a like and a share is greatly appreciated. You can find me on Twitter at 2bprudential, and if you like this content, you can of course always back me on Subscribestar, a link in the description. Until next time, be prudent, everybody.